Hi, I'm Brett from Pod Active. Today we'll be rebuilding or replacing the ligament and the hinge housing on your K-Series brace. So you've identified that you need to replace the ligament or even potentially the hinge housing on your brace. Whether it's the K1, K4 or K8 that I have in my hand, they all share the same hinge housing and ligament. If you're actually using the older K300 or K700 brace, then you actually can move to the new hinge housing, though you will have to replace the patella cup as well. We made some updates and changes from the K300, K700 to the new 1, 4 and 8 hinge housing. You'll note the new hinge housing has 2 holes. So in checking your ligament, when you lock out the brace, you need to make sure the 2 screws are visible within those holes. If they aren't, that's when you need to replace the ligament. You can quite easily order the ligament kits, which is the 2 ligaments. It provides the screws as well as the tool to replace the screws, or a whole hinge housing kit, which has the hinge housing, the shim stops, as well as the ligaments within. So now we'll actually show you how to replace the hinge housing and the ligament on your K-Series brace. So firstly, remove the hinge pads, whether you're using the thick or these grey thinner pads. Remove the hinge pads. If you're using the hinge stops within your hinge housing, you will need to remove those red hinge stops before you can replace the ligament and the hinge housing. To remove the patella cup, it's very simple. There's a tab on the inside of the housing. Press down on that tab and pop the patella off. Repeat on the other side. And now you can use the tool that comes in the ligament set to undo the screw that's holding the lower frame to the hinge housing. You'll need a flathead screwdriver, so the flathead screwdriver will attach to the inside of the screw, and then you could use the tool on the outside to undo the screw. Now that we've taken the screws off the lower hinge housing, we simply slide the lower frame off. With that lower frame off, the hinge housings will slide off from the ligament and the upper frame. So with the hinge housings removed, now you can use that flathead screwdriver along with the tool that came with your ligament rebuild kit. Undo the screws for the ligament so that you can detach the ligament from the upper frame. So now that we've taken the hinge housings, the ligaments off the brace, you can inspect your upper frame cups, pads, as well as your lower frame cups and pads. Make sure there's no damage. Today we'll be replacing a full knee hinge housing as well as the ligaments. You can simply though just buy the ligaments if you've broken them, if they've stretched or if they're damaged. We do encourage you, probably within a year, depending on the frequency that you ride, to replace the ligaments. They actually can hold 340 kilos, so in excess of 700 pounds of tensile strength. However, after thousands of bends, again, because they're emulating the human motion, they will start to stretch and they will slowly break down. So like the tires on the bike, like the chains, sprockets, a lot of consumables, the ligaments is probably the cheapest part of the brace and a piece that is designed to be replaced easily by you at home. So now we'll move on to reversing everything we just did in actually reattaching the new ligaments, sliding the housing onto the upper frame, and then reattaching the lower frame. Having unpacked all the pieces of the hinge rebuild kit, slide the new ligaments onto the upper frame. So with those both in place, first grab the female, the larger of the 2 screw parts, and place those on the inside of each of the ligaments. Now that you've attached the ligaments to the upper frame, take a hinge housing, slide them straight over the ligament onto the upper frame. They will only fit one way with the pod logos at the front of the brace. Now that they're in place, you can reattach the lower frame. So you can slide the lower frame through the hinge housing and connect it to the ligament. And with that now connected, repeat by putting the male and the female screws through the bottom, lower frame and ligament. And then once they're tight, we'll move on to the patella attachment. Now that we've reattached the hinge housing and the ligaments to the upper and the lower frame, check the brace for natural human motion. Make sure that the hinge housing and new ligament are functioning correctly. Now that you've reattached the hinge housing to the frames and the new ligaments are in place, if you still have your original packaging or if you've purchased new padding from your dealer or online, you'll know that you received the grey, thinner knee pads, the thicker knee hinge housing pads, plus the high density shims. So these allow you to actually pad out the hinge housing to tailor it for even pressure for your knee. We're going to be putting the grey thin pads into this K8 knee brace today. So each knee pad or hinge pad has a thicker part and it tapers off to a thinner part at the back. So that thicker part will be at the front of the brace, which is on the patella side of the brace. So put the thicker part toward the patella and that will actually be thinner, tapering off to the back side of the brace, which will be at the back of your knee. So ultimately you will have more support toward the front of your knee. Within your brace bag, you also received some hinge stops. They assist with the earlier lockout. There's thinner and thicker. So we're going to insert the thinner versions in the right housing of this brace. So you can cut them away from the original card and then you'll bend your brace. So fully extend your brace and then you can insert the thinner or the thicker stop into the top frame first, and then we'll do the same thing, repeat that with the lower frame. Now we'll reattach the patella cup. That can only be attached one way. It's asymmetrical, so you won't be able to put it in upside down. And that will easily snap in, make sure it pushes through and clicks so that the tab's in place on the left and the right side. Again, check that the brace is functioning correctly and the patella is seated correctly by simply bending the brace. That's how easy it is for you at home to rebuild or replace the hinge housing and the ligament on your K-Series brace. So please log on to podactive.com to check out some of our other videos on how to replace any of the soft components or impact protection of your K-Series brace.